Welcome to Champion Stepdad Podcast. We're exploring the unique role of stepdads, stepfathers, and bonus dads, and how to apply performance psychology skills to be a better father figure and role model. Building a band of brothers by focusing on empathy and accountability. I really like to focus on those two things because being a stepdad is tough, right? Empathy. It's a unique role requiring patience, healthy boundaries, and no shortage of love, but also accountability. Because I get it, being a stepdad is tough. You also chose to take on this role. There's no accidental stepdads. So use the opportunity to be the best father figure and mentor that you can be. We're here to support you. We're here to be your accountability partners. Please, for the stepdads out there, join the Champion Stepdad Facebook group. We're building an awesome community. One of those is here with me today, Lee Mooring. Thanks for being on here. I am your host, Neil Wattier. I'm a 16-year stepdad. I'm a resilience trainer and a performance consultant. But also, just because I've been a stepdad for a long time doesn't mean that I know everything. I am here just as much to learn as I am to share with you. So we're going to be sharing our stories. We're going to be talking about a couple things. I encourage you to join the Facebook group and contact me if you have any interest in being on the conversation. We do one-to-ones. We'll also do group conversations. I'm mixing it up a little bit because I just like having the conversations and learning from so many different people. So let's get to it. So building our bands of brothers here with Lee Mooring. Lee, thanks a lot for joining me on Champion Stepdad. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Hey, and so we were going to talk a little bit about some conversations that I've seen recently, things like standards and accountability, basic communication, but then also role of the stepdad. I want to get your thoughts on that, but I also want to give just a minute so you can give a quick introduction. Let us know who you are, where you're calling in from, and your current situation as a stepdad.
Okay, cool. So once again, Lee Mooring from Stafford, Virginia. And right now I am in my third marriage. My wife and I, we don't have any children yet. In my second marriage, though, I did have a stepdaughter for 9 years. So my experience is coming from that, dealing with my stepdaughter. And then I have two children to my first marriage, two sons. So a little bit of experience being a stepfather. So hopefully I can contribute to the conversation. But once again, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. So what's that look like? So similar situation. I'm engaged and going to get married, and this is going to be my third. I have two biological children from my first marriage. My second marriage, we didn't have any kids together, but I have a stepson. And so hearing you say, because words matter, right? Words show a real intent that you had a stepdaughter, and I'm in a certain situation where I haven't really had a lot of contact because my second marriage ended really bad, and I haven't been able to have a continuous relationship. What does that look like for you? What do you mean by I had a stepdaughter?
It's interesting you say that because it's first of all we're on number 3, both of us. So that's good to have in common, I guess. And then for my second marriage, it was just a bad breakup, and so with my stepdaughter, it was tough for her. And when we got divorced, she was right around 17, 18 years old. And so, although we had a good relationship throughout the marriage, that breakup was something that she kind of, took hard. And so, after the marriage had ended, that relationship did not continue.
I know what that's like, and I know it's tough. Has there been any thought on long term of potential to maybe bring that back together again down the road? Like, what are your thoughts going forward?
For me, I think it's a situation where I look at the betterment of the other individual as far as the stepdaughter is concerned. And if she ever were to reach out to me, certainly I will be there. But I think that for her, it's about or her healing, whatever she needs to, either reconcile the relationship, or what is the word? I guess, it's all on her. As I look at it, it's not that it's her responsibility, but if she is seeking to mend the relationship, then I'm certainly open to that. Based on the way the marriage ended, I don't want to pull off any, reopen any wounds or anything like that. So, I'm certainly open to conversation. And, it's interesting with stepchildren because, or just anybody in your life, you really don't stop loving them just because, you part, especially children. In this situation, we were a family for 8-9 years, so you don't just stop loving people overnight. And so, but I understand that, she, when we got divorced, she took it really tough and wrote a really nasty letter to me. And so, with that in mind, I just kind of looked at it, well, when she's ready to have the conversation, then I'm ready to have the conversation as well.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the same approach that I've taken is, I kind of left it in his hands. I have sent him an occasional message, card for his birthday or something like that, with just a little note saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about you. If you want to re-engage," that kind of a thing. It was a little more well written than that, but the idea that I think you're right. Like, I'm here for you. I'd be open to having that conversation and re-engaging the relationship. But I can't be that person that chases it down. And, I don't want to ruin something before it's in a position where he's ready for it. And I think that's the right attitude. I really do. Cause I think that's, and I think I've always had that approach to it. At first, maybe there was a little bit of pressure on my side, and I could see where it didn't sit well. So, I think the idea of, see what time does to it.
Yeah.
So you are married, and this is something that I've kind of, my own personal, wrestling with something that's on my own, is the idea of, the continuous repeated failures that I experienced. And for a while, I was pretty hard on myself. The idea of, there's a common denominator in, the fact that I keep having these failed relationships. And for a while, I was pretty hard on myself. It was pretty harsh. And what are your thoughts about that? Because, what were your thoughts heading into like a third marriage?
It's interesting you bring that up. I don't think I ever looked at it for me as a failure. I just kind of viewed it as, I wasn't with the right person. We just didn't, it might've been, we got married for the wrong reasons. But, coming into this third marriage, I was more aware of what I was looking for and who I wanted to spend my life with. And it was more of a, I'm looking for a friend. Everybody says, the perfect person is to marry your best friend. And this time I absolutely did marry my best friend. And so, coming into this, I think that I was into my third marriage. I was a whole lot more mature, more level-headed, grounded, towards the latter part of my military career. So I kind of knew what I wanted my future to look like and the type of person I wanted to be with. So, I'm so grateful for, my first marriage, because my sons, I love my sons to death. I have 2 sons from that first marriage. The second marriage, a learning experience. And, I just take all that experience from both and just make myself a better person and better husband for my wife now.
What's that been like for you two to prepare because we take this, my focus has been specifically with stepdads, and I only do that because advice from business professionals that, hey, get as far down as you can into a niche, and try to help, be very, very specific about who you help. And it's not that I'm more concerned about stepdads than I am about stepmoms. It's or blended families in general. It's just, that's where I've chosen to take my emphasis. But I see stepmoms having a lot of the same issues that stepdads do, and blended families in general, trying to bring together, the past into some type of current healthy family unit. And it can be really difficult. What kind of conversations have you had bringing in, your children into a relationship, and, being like me with older children? What's that conversation been like for the two of you?
For me and my wife now, it was just a conversation. So my children are older. One's in college and one's in the Marine Corps. So it wasn't that they would be with us living day in and day out, but we certainly would go and visit them. They lived in Hawaii with their mom, so we got to take a vacation quite often to go there. It was just with my sons being basically in high school and then adults, the conversation was just about, letting them know, hey, I'm getting married, and then them actually meeting. And then with my wife, it was just a sense of, I'm not asking you to be a mother. They have a mother. Just be respectful. And so they get along great when we're together. But I think, like you mentioned, the key is communication and to have those conversations. You can't just put everybody in the mix and expect it to work out. But before you go into these situations, I think when you get to the point where you think that this person may be the one, that's when you start having the conversations of, how is this family dynamics going to occur? What am I going to say to the children to get them ready? How's the initial introduction going to be, to my significant other? What are the expectations? And so because my children were older and they didn't stay with us, the conversation was a little bit different, but we certainly did have the conversation. And it goes back to where you started about communication being the key, because you have to have these conversations. Not, you're going to end up being in situations that are more, you're going to have difficult conversations once you're in the midst of them. Rather than being proactive, you're being reactive.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm a member of several Facebook groups, and I appreciate those type of groups because they're not open to the public, right? You have to join. They do have, rules and expectations, and it allows a place where people can come in, people with similar experiences or similar backgrounds or situations, and have those discussions. And I appreciate that, especially as a guy who, with, just society in general, there's so many barriers and expectations and unhealthy expectations that we're trying to break down. And I think that conversations like this, and Facebook groups and communities, supportive communities, and talking about building a band of brothers, that isn't just it's not a catchphrase, right? It's not something to say flippantly. We're saying this as a serious attempt to try to build community where people can feel like, number one, they feel heard, they feel accepted and understood, but then they can have honest conversation where, I don't have it all together, and I have questions, and how do I handle this? And so a lot of the questions that I see and the comments and conversations on some of the Facebook groups involve things that really boil down to communication. My wife and I don't agree, and we can't get the kids to comply. Well, if you don't agree, what are the kids supposed to comply with, right? And you don't think the kids are acting right, or they're being disrespectful to you. Well, of course they're not going to be respectful. Kids are naturally, they want to push boundaries. And you have to look at it. I mean, when I was a kid, I was in a nuclear family. My mom and my dad were both there, and I was, three brothers, four brothers that, my oldest brother was out of the house. He was a little bit older, but we had the same kind of conflict. If my mom and dad didn't get along, I was like, oh, opportunity, that's just how kids work. And then you add in the non-biological and then the biological and all these different situations. I mean, number one, it's kids are kids, but also it's confusing for them because who the hell are they supposed to listen to? Or, you guys can't get your stuff together. What do you expect from me? Right. So I think there's a lot to be said for basic communication of what are the standards and what are the standards that we expect in this household. And that's kind of that overlays with another conversation we were having about the role of stepdads and the fact that, okay, so you may not agree with the biological father and how he runs his house and with the good relationship that he has with the kids. You can't control that. Like you gotta throw that out, man. You can't stew on that. You can be aware of it, sure, and I am too, and I have conversations with my fiance, and we just have to be aware of how he runs his house, but we can't let that fluster us. We still have to just maintain what we have at our house, and these are the standards that we have. They're communicated, they're consistent, right? Consistent is another thing. Kids love consistency. They won't admit it, but kids thrive in consistency, right? So what are your thoughts about all that? Like the idea of standards and accountability. And I mean, you brought up the, communication. What was your experience, maybe even previously, with how did you guys communicate and handle the role, but then also this like standards and accountability for standards?
It's interesting you mentioned that before I go into how we handle it. Going back to what you talked about that, standards and consistency. I think that in the situation you have, your new spouse, your old spouse, you have, the step parents, you have the biological parents. I think that in the beginning, once you're moving down that serious road, that all adults need to come to the table and sit down and, hey, here's the standards across the board. When they're here, they're going to bed at 9:00. When they're there, they're going to bed at 9:00. If you have something different, bring it up now so we can talk about it and get it out in the open. That way the child knows what to expect when they're at home and when they're visiting. That way you get that consistency. In my situation, I didn't have so much of that just because for my stepdaughter, her father wasn't there, wasn't in the picture. And so we didn't have to necessarily deal with that. But one thing we did have to deal with was the fact that, here you have a single mom with a daughter and their relationship with just being the two of them for several years. And now here comes, the husband, the stepdad into the picture. And so those dynamics, what is just, letting the child know, it's a sense of, everybody's roles and responsibilities, because like you alluded to earlier, that, a child is always going to, if one parent is always the yes parent, that child is going to always go to them, and the child is going to find a way to manipulate the situation to get the answer that they want. So it goes back to, I think, setting those standards of, here's how this household is going to work. And, I think that even especially with younger children, that you write something down. You write it down so that it's something that can be reviewed periodically, not just, okay, here's how things are, here's the rules, here's the guidelines in the beginning, and then just forget about them, just expect everybody to follow them. But just continuously reiterating them, write them down, I think will make the transition and then everybody living together pretty smooth.
Yeah. And, when we talk about things like standards and accountability, people that know me, I've been in the military for 26 years. They're like, oh, I don't want to have a military household. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be so
right.
rigid. In fact, you don't want it to be so rigid, but you have to start somewhere. You have to have standards. What's the expectation of TV, can they have TV and games in the room? Like, you as an adult have to have those conversations. What's the bedtime, right? What's the acceptable conversation? I don't want the kids to just, this is dad said it, so that's the way it is. No, I expect kids to answer, especially younger kids. And that we have that conversation with I had that conversation with Cindy recently, that I had to realize and had to remember, like a 6-year-old can't comprehend attitude. They don't understand that they have an attitude. They don't understand that, hey, you said that in an appropriate way. And he's like, I don't know what you mean, as I'm just telling you that I'm mad. Okay. So, have allowing things to happen appropriately, but to have that understanding ahead of time, or have the communication where you can have that, maybe after the fact or even during, say, hey, we need to take a break and let's talk about this. If you don't have the ability to have that conversation, you're already in a deficit, because you're not even on the same page of how you're running your household.
Right. Right. I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I agree on that, where you said that, it doesn't have to be that strict military structure, but, something, like you said, the bedtime, what's the allowance going to be? What's the curfew when they go out? I think that these are all conversations that need to be had between the adults before the marriage occurs, because I think that once you're in the marriage, because things move so quickly, if you have a plan, then you can adapt. Things are going to come up out of nowhere, emergencies. But if you have some type of structure in the beginning, then you know how to deal with these things. If, for example, one parent, you like to make decisions together, but if one parent is not there, then it's okay for little Johnny or little Jill to go to the step parent, and it's okay for them to give them permission, and it's okay for these things to happen. But if you don't have those conversations, and things are going to come up unexpectedly, and so you deal with them. But then afterwards, military minded, we do an after action report. Let's talk about what happened and how it can be different in the future.
and a lot of the things that I find myself engaging with people in is lessons I've learned from failed relationships. I like the idea that there is no failure as long as you're learning, right? And I also try to be accountable, hold myself accountable, not try to be too hard on myself, but try to hold myself accountable that, I was a large factor in 2 failed relationships. I have to take responsibility for that. If I don't, then if I'm letting myself off the hook too easy, then what am I really learning from that?
Right.
But the idea of, okay, what am I bringing into the relationship? Because not only my bad habits, the baggage, my bad habits, my experiences, all the way back to me being raised by my parents, and then raising my own children, and then raising somebody else's child. There are some good things that I've done, but there's also some counterproductive habits that I got into, right? I don't want to be too harsh and say I got bad habits, but there's some things that I do for these, for a 6 and a 9-year-old, that it didn't even work when I tried it with my kids that are now 21 and 25, right? So why am I going to try to reproduce something that I didn't like in the first place? So right. Try to be somebody who's more proactive, more productive, more forward thinking, rather than, I don't want to be that person. I never liked the idea of being an authoritarian parent. I didn't like that, but for some reason I brought that in because that's how I was raised. So having the accountability, having a good relationship with good communication, and a good partner who can pull me aside and say, hey, I don't think you handled that as well as you could have.
Mm-hmm. Right. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. If we don't learn, we're not growing. And I think that, by being on marriage number 3, there's, I took my part in the first, and why things didn't work. But, learning from those experiences and knowing that, those bad habits or whatever I was doing in those situations that was, toxic to those relationships, I can't bring them forward. So, you learn from them. And I believe that learning from those experiences has helped me now to be a better husband.
Yeah. So standards and accountability, it's a united front with you and your spouse. What's acceptable behavior, cleanliness standards, organization, bedtime, homework, chores, friends, there's so many different ways. And no, I'm not encouraging, to be rigid and to be able to think of everything. You got to be able to think on your feet. But basic relationship stuff, solid communication to make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page. And that leads to the next thing, is the idea of, I've never liked the idea of people who say things like putting the kids first or making sure the kids are, happy. If you are not actively engaged in having the best relationship that you can, which means that putting you and your spouse first ahead of the kids, your relationship is going to suffer at some point in time and to some degree. And some people can fake it and some people can just make it through. But again, I don't want a mediocre life. I want a great life. In order to have a great life, I need to push the details, right? And so I'm not comfortable having even in a stepdad role where the kids are more important than my relationship with my spouse or my fiance, my significant other. We need to make sure that we are putting the relationship first, because kids who are in a household where the relationship between the two adults is priority will flourish. They will see how two people live together. They will have the model of what a relationship looks like. They will feel the love and support, right? As opposed to one where the kids get pushed forward, the parents are disorganized. They might argue, even if they put up a good front, they're still just not doing really well. So I'm a huge proponent of, you need to put your relationship first, even when you're in the stepdad role.
Yes, you know what, you hit the nail on the head. I am 1,000% on board with that. From a biblical perspective, it is about putting your spouse first, and then, well, first of all, first God, then your spouse, then your children. But I believe, just like you said, that you have to put that spouse, your significant other, first, because you're setting the example, you're setting the tone for the house. And I think that there's a division when there's a parent that puts the child first, because I believe that when you put your child first, you're inadvertently taking away something from the other spouse. And, one thing, this isn't a popular thought, what I'm about to say, but I've seen several times where the woman is like, "Oh no, my child is going to be first before any man." And I just don't subscribe to that, because I believe that you're moving into a union with another individual. And, if the lines of communication are open and you have the bond and you have that love there, that is going to trickle down, and the child is going to see that. And you are going to incorporate the child so that they feel just as much love. But if you're putting more attention, putting more love towards the children, well, then you got a significant other that may start to feel neglected. But I think that, yes, it could happen with a child as well. But I believe that if you're truly on one accord with your significant other, there's going to be so much love and so much good communication in that family, that child is going to be loved even more and going to feel more appreciated, and is never going to feel neglected, because you coming together with your significant other, you have such a bond that you're working on that family unit, and it's just all going to be, just wonderful. But if you, put a child first, I don't subscribe to that one.
Yeah, those good thoughts, man. I really like that. So we've hit on standards and accountability. We've hit on communication. Man, we've like, I love these unstructured conversations, because before we came on, I said, "Hey, here's a couple things I want to talk about," and it's, we could probably talk for 45 to 60 minutes on any one of these conversations. And we're not trying to solve anybody's problems. This is about building a strong community. And the number one way to build a strong community is to tell, number one, tell your story, right? Telling your story gives other people the opportunity, but also permission to tell their story. Community is built on, some type of commonality, some type of common struggle or common hope or common vision. And I think that's where stepdads, it is a unique and it is a difficult position, but I don't want anybody to go out there and make it any more difficult than it needs to be. I mean, if you're going into a relationship, go into a relationship with someone that you love and you care about. And if you love and you care about that person enough, nothing else is going to matter. And you build a strong bond with that person. There is a lot of unique situations, and I've got friends with, autistic children, or they have the biological dad is either not around or he's around and he's abusive or just weird, awkward, right? There's a lot of different kind of situations out there. And I'm creating a community where people can share their story also allows with connections so that we can support each other. We can listen to each other with empathy, right? But then the other thing is the accountability. Okay, my favorite saying is, okay, that happened, now what? Right? I got it. Okay, so you had I didn't like the way that my parents raised me. Okay, got it. Now what? Right? What am I going to do about it? I'm 46 years old. How long am I going to hate on my parents for how they raised me? I can't keep doing that. And aside from, and I keep going back to it, aside from serious abuse, alcohol abuse, child abuse, abandonment, like those kind of things, if you're not going to involve the police or child protective services, like, yeah, okay, got it. Like, that's tough. That sucks. But what are you going to do about it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think that, like you said, it's like, now what? People have, going back to what you said, everybody has a story. Everybody has had their ups and downs, their trials or tribulations. I believe that reaching out to get help, to move past, and we're saying, just suck it up and deal with it. No, there's plenty of help. There's plenty of people out there, just like this community was designed. And I love your idea of this community, because men, we typically have problem sharing. And so we have problems with the safe zone and who to share with, and we have to be macho all the time. But when we're in that same boat together, when we have that commonality, it's a little bit easier. Everybody's sharing their story. Hey, here's what I went through. How can I help someone else? And seeing that, all it takes is that first person to share, and then everybody else can just fall in line and share as well. And there's so much healing in just sharing. And we all think that we're in situations alone, and we're not. If you look around, there's so many people that are going through the same thing that we have, or they've done it in the past, or they've seen it in the past, and that's how we help each other. We share that testimony of how we got over, because what Neil might have went through is a little bit different than mine, but it's similar enough that if he tells me his story and what helped him, I guarantee that will help me. And I like that about this community, that we can reach out to one another. We can just, if we need to vent, hey, here's what's going on. Just that ear to listen to is helping us, because now it's not storing up in us. We're not just, keeping it all to ourselves, because I'm sure we've all been in situations where we see those individuals who just store everything up inside. It gets to a point where it can be, very unhealthy and destructive.
Yeah, it's good thoughts. Yeah, man. I think that's that says a lot right there. And honestly, we hit everything that we had meant on to talk about. I don't want to drag this out any longer than we need to. I don't. You and I could talk for a long time, but for the sake of of podcast and rolling things out, what last thoughts do you have with some of the things that we've talked about, some of your experiences, where with the direction we're going with the community, with Champion Stepdad community, not just the podcast, not just the Facebook the group, but just stepdad community? What thoughts do you have?
With the stepdad community, my thoughts are just that, we're a group of men who have been through similar situations, and we're here for each other. And everyone that enters this group is entering for a reason. You have a story, you have a testimony. So I would just say, don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions and share. Just like I said, just takes that one person, but don't feel that you're alone and that your situation has not been dealt with before, because it has. And, one of my quotes I like to quote is that, an educated person doesn't know all the answers, but knows where to find them. And so if you pose a question in the group and someone doesn't know the answer, we're going to find it. Neil's going to find the answer for it, so not to put you on the spot, but yeah, Neil find the answer for you and get you pointed in the right direction. So just know that this is a community about us all growing and getting better together.
That's I like the way you put that, because one of the experiences I've had in the last few years being a senior enlisted leader in the Air Force is I try to tell people, especially the junior, the younger airman, is my benefit to you is not necessarily what I know, but it's who I know. And I pride myself on having a very strong network of really brilliant people. And so if you come to me with an issue, I'll talk to you and maybe share you some of my story, but most likely my greatest benefit to you is going to be who I can connect you with. Right. I know, you're a great speaker and, a man of faith. And I know other people that are, really good at clinical counseling. And, I know other people that are pastors. I know other people that are athletes, and everybody's got their own story and their own way to connect and their own specialty and a way to help people. And I think that's the first thing that we can do is listen, right? Empathy. You can't go wrong with empathy. It's not making excuses. It's just allowing people to tell their story. And even when people are complaining, right? Because there's a difference between complaining and venting. But even when people are complaining, sometimes people just need to get stuff off their chest, before they can get to a place of acceptance and listen to you say, okay, now what? Maybe they just need to complain. And that's okay. Sometimes it's, I've had some of the greatest conversations with some of my friends, and hey, we go to the bar and we both vent for a while. And then by the time we leave, we're both looking at each other saying, okay, now what are you going to do about it? Right. Cause that's what a great community does. And I've got 2 or 3 friends that at any one time I call them up, and I know there's more. I definitely have more than that, but I've got my 2 or 3 really, really strong people. I can call them in anytime and I can talk to them about anything and they'll listen. But by the end of the conversation, they're going to be saying the same thing. What are you going to do about it? All right. What's your next step? Right. Because that's the accountability part. Because I can love you and I can listen to you, but at some point that love's going to come out as, okay, now what? Right. So
right.
I love creating the space for people to have the conversations, to admit that they don't know what they're talking about, because that's the first step to education. You have to admit that you don't know something. Right. To really learn something and to really engage, you have to admit that you don't know. And that sometimes that takes a little bit of, a safe space. And some people don't like that word or that term, but, we're creating something where people can show up, they can listen to other people, and then eventually they can feel comfortable enough to start sharing and asking questions and getting engaged. Right. Sometimes it's offering advice. Sometimes it's receiving advice. Sometimes it's just listening. And so that's what I like most about this opportunity. So I really appreciate your time, Lee. It's been great talking to you. We all have the opportunity as stepdads. We're helpers, we're stewards, we're mentors, we're father figures. Most of all, I want you to know that you're not expected to do this alone. You are not expected to know everything. Build your band of brothers for support and accountability. Seek advice and assistance from mental health professionals. be a lifelong learner. You chose this role, so make sure you approach it as an opportunity and take it as an obligation to be the best father figure and mentor you can be, because you're changing the world one child at a time. Build that relationship with your significant other and enjoy your life. Thanks for listening. Lee, thanks a lot for joining me. Welcome back for future episodes. Love to have you part of group conversations. Really enjoyed this time with you. If you are listening, please go join the Champion Stepdad Facebook group. Help us build the community. My name is Neil Wattier. Look forward to talking to you next week on